I've always been a hands-on kind of guy. Give me a wrench, a busted engine, and a good set of schematics, and I'm happier than a clam at high tide. That's why I loved being an aircraft mechanic. Not the white-collar office-type aircraft mechanic. The real deal, down in the trenches, smelling of jet fuel and grease. For 30 years, I'd been working at that small airstrip just outside of Silverton, Colorado. I was 57, and to be honest, most of me was original equipment, but a tad worn like an old reliable Cessna 182. My specialty was older planes, the kind with carburetors you could practically rebuild with your eyes closed, and wiring that looked like a squirrel's nest after a particularly rough winter. I knew their quirks, their groans, their whispers. It wasn't just a job, it was a relationship. I understood them, and I think in some weird way they understood me. That Thursday started like any other. Overcast, a bit of a chill in the air, typical late October in Colorado. I'd gotten in early, around 6:30 a.m., to finish up a tricky fuel pump issue on a Cessna 182. The owner, a farmer named Travis, was itching to get it back in the air to check on his cattle. He was a good guy, Travis, always brought us fresh-baked cherry pie from his wife, Bonnie. Best cherry pie this side of the Mississippi, I swear. I was humming along to some old Merle Haggard on my battered workshop radio, tools spread out on my workbench like surgical instruments. The fuel pump was being a real pain. One of those tiny little screws buried deep in the guts of the thing just wouldn't budge. I'd tried everything, penetrating oil, tapping it gently, even a little prayer to St. Eligius, patron saint of mechanics, or so I'd been told by old Mr. Donovan, my mentor, years ago. Nothing. Finally, I decided to try a slightly bigger screwdriver, hoping to get a better grip. Big mistake. Huge. I leaned in, put a little extra muscle into it, and snap. The screwdriver head broke, a jagged piece flying off and hitting me square in the, well, let's just say, right above the eye. Now, I've had my share of bumps and bruises in this job. Wrenches to the knuckles, hot oil splatters, even a close call with a propeller once. But this was different. It felt like getting hit by a fastball, right in the temple. The world didn't go black, not at first. It went sideways, like someone had grabbed the horizon and tilted it 90 degrees. The radio's twang turned into a distorted, buzzing drone. I remember seeing the fuel pump, still perched on the workbench out of the corner, all bright and shiny, all blurry. Then the pain hit. Not a sharp pain, but a dull, throbbing ache that spread like wildfire through my head. I staggered back, knocking over a can of spare parts. Bolts and washers clattered across the concrete floor, a chaotic soundtrack to my sudden, unexpected downfall. I tried to call out, to yell for help, but my voice was gone, trapped somewhere deep in my throat. My legs turned to rubber, and I crumpled to the floor, the cold concrete pressing against my cheek. The last thing I saw, before everything went truly dark, was a spreading pool of my own blood, reflecting the dim workshop lights like a grotesque crimson mirror. It wasn't the darkness that got me, though. It was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but a silence so profound, so complete, it was almost a sound in itself. The hum of the radio, the clatter of tools, even the distant rumble of a passing truck, all gone. Vanished. Swallowed up by this void. And then the smell. Not the usual workshop smells of oil and metal, but something different. Something sweet yet acrid, like burning incense mixed with I don't even know what. It was a smell that seemed to bypass my nose entirely and go straight to my brain, triggering a wave of nausea and a feeling of utter primal dread. I felt detached, like I was floating just above my body, looking down at myself. It was weird, seeing myself lying there, that red stain growing larger on the concrete. I looked smaller somehow, insignificant, like a discarded rag doll. I didn't feel any pain anymore, which I guess was a good thing, but I also didn't feel anything else. No fear, no sadness, no regret, just emptiness. Then I started to rise. Not float, exactly, but more like being gently pulled upwards, like a balloon released from a child's hand. The workshop receded, growing smaller and smaller below me. The airstrip, the town of Silverton, the rolling Colorado hills, all shrinking into the distance. I went through the roof without so much as a bump. I passed through the overcast sky, the gray clouds swirling around me like wisps of smoke. And then I was above it all. The sun. It wasn't the familiar yellow sun I was used to. This sun was brilliant, blindingly so. a white-hot, almost painful radiance that seemed to emanate from everything, not just a single point in the sky. And the blue, a blue so deep, so pure, it made the earthly sky seem like a faded, washed-out photograph. I was still rising, faster now, drawn towards something. I couldn't see it, not yet, but I could feel it. A presence, a power, something immeasurably vast and ancient and holy. I know that word sounds corny, but it's the only one that fits. It felt like coming home after a long, long journey. But mixed with that feeling of homecoming, there was something else, a growing sense of unease. Not fear, exactly, but a profound awareness of my own unworthiness, like standing before a king in rags covered in filth. I started to remember things, everything, every lie I'd ever told, every unkind word I'd ever spoken, every selfish act, every missed opportunity to do good. It wasn't like seeing a movie of my life, it was more like reliving it all at once, the good and the bad. And the bad, oh, the bad weighed so heavily. And then I started to see the details of my life and what each choice and action will mean for the future. It was like the plan of my whole life was revealed to me, and how I chose to deviate from it. I remembered the time I'd cheated on that math test in 7th grade. Mrs. Jensen, with her kind eyes and patient smile, had trusted me, and I'd betrayed that trust. I felt the shame of it, fresh and raw, as if it had happened yesterday. I remembered the fight I'd had with my brother Marcus years ago over something stupid, a borrowed tool, I think it was. We hadn't spoken in years after that, a stupid, pointless grudge, and now it felt like the most tragic thing in the world. I remembered all the times I'd brushed off beggars on the street, too busy with my own life to spare a dime or a kind word. I saw their faces now, etched with hunger and despair, and the weight of my indifference was crushing. I remembered that I hadn't prayed, not with focus. Oh, I was going to church, but I was so focused on the mundane. Even the small things, the seemingly insignificant things, were there. The times I'd been impatient with the slow cashier at the grocery store, the times I'd cut someone off in traffic, the times I'd chosen to watch TV instead of spending time with Cynthia. All of it. It accumulated, a mountain of regrets, of missed chances, of sins both big and small. And as I rose higher, closer to that presence, that overwhelming light, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. It was more than guilt. It was a profound understanding of the gap, the chasm between who I was and who I should have been, between my flawed, sinful self and the infinite holiness that I was approaching. And then the visions started, not like dreams, not blurry or indistinct. These were sharp, clear, and intensely real. They were of things I didn't understand, things that seemed impossible, yet I knew with a certainty that went beyond logic that they were true. The first vision was of light, not just the brilliant, all-encompassing light I was already bathed in, but a different kind of light, a light within the light. It was shaped somehow like a person, but made entirely of pure, incandescent energy. It wasn't a form I could easily describe. It shifted, changed, flowed like liquid gold, yet it was undeniably there. And from this being emanated a love so profound, so overwhelming, that it brought tears to my eyes, tears I didn't even know I could still cry. This love wasn't just a feeling, it was a force, a power that held everything together, that animated the universe. But along with the love, there was also sorrow, a deep, abiding sadness that seemed to emanate from the very core of this light being. It wasn't anger or disappointment, but a profound grief, a lament for something lost, something broken. And I understood somehow that the sorrow was for us, for humanity, for our choices, our failures, our refusal to turn towards the light. Then the vision shifted. I saw faces, millions of them, faces of every age, every race, every background. Some were filled with joy, radiating a light that seemed to connect them to the greater light I had seen before. Others were twisted in anguish, consumed by darkness, their eyes filled with a despair so profound it made my soul ache. And I started to understand. It was a knowledge that bypassed my brain and went straight to my spirit. I understood the choices that had led each face to its ultimate destination, the paths they had taken, the decisions they had made, the beliefs they had held. And with terrifying clarity, I realized there are two paths, and the way we live each day is us choosing right or left. Day by day, tiny steps forward to the right path or the left path. I saw people who had lived lives of outward piety, who had attended church regularly, given to charity, even preached to others. But their hearts were filled with pride, with self-righteousness, with a judgmental spirit that had poisoned their good deeds, rendering them hollow and meaningless. And their faces were among the most anguished. The irony was sharp, stinging, almost unbearable. They followed the path that looked right but led to emptiness. Then I saw people who had lived seemingly ordinary lives, who had struggled, who had made mistakes, who had even doubted. But their hearts were filled with a genuine love, a deep compassion, a persistent yearning for something more than themselves. And though they might not even be aware of God and His teachings, their faces, though marked by the scars of life, shone with a faint but unmistakable light. It was a light that resonated with the light of the being I had seen earlier, a connection that transcended their earthly flaws. The vision shifted again, faster now, a swirling kaleidoscope of images and emotions. I saw wars, famines, plagues, natural disasters. I saw the consequences of greed, of hatred, of indifference. I saw the suffering of the innocent, the cruelty of the powerful, the despair of the forgotten. But even amidst the darkness, I saw flickers of light, acts of selfless kindness, moments of courage and compassion, whispers of hope in the face of despair. A doctor working tirelessly in a war-torn country, a teacher inspiring her students in a run-down school, a stranger sharing his last piece of bread with a hungry child. These small, seemingly insignificant acts shone like stars in the night sky, piercing the darkness and illuminating the path. And then I saw it. The crash. It was a vision of the DC crash. It wasn't like watching it on the news. It was like being there. I saw the plane, a sleek, modern airliner, hurtling towards the ground. I saw the faces of the passengers, frozen in terror. I heard the screams, the crunch of metal, the sudden deafening silence that followed. But I also saw something else, something that no news report, no investigation could ever reveal. I saw forces at work, not just mechanical failures, not just pilot error, but something darker, something malevolent. It was a presence, a shadowy, indistinct force that seemed to revel in the chaos, in the suffering, in the destruction. And it wasn't just present at the crash, it was influencing it. It was like watching a puppet show, but the puppeteer was hidden in the shadows, pulling the strings of fate, manipulating events to bring about the maximum amount of pain and loss. This was not a random act. This was not bad luck. This was a calculated act. And it hit me, like a lightning, how this force is in every evil act, big or small. I saw the pilot, struggling with the controls, but I saw him confused in the crucial last seconds. He wasn't incompetent. He was experienced, capable. He should have been able to pull up to at least soften the impact. But something was wrong. It was as if his mind was clouded, his reflexes dulled, his judgment impaired. And I saw with a sickening clarity that this wasn't a natural impairment. It was influence. That dark, malevolent force I had sensed was actively interfering, whispering doubts, amplifying fears, creating confusion. It was subtle, insidious, like a poison slowly seeping into his mind. Then I saw the passengers, not just their faces, but their lives, flashes of their past, their hopes, their dreams, their fears. I saw families on vacation, businessmen on their way to important meetings, young couples starting new lives, elderly grandparents returning home, ordinary people with ordinary lives caught in a tragedy they couldn't possibly comprehend. Among them, I saw a young woman, probably no older than 25, clutching a small, stuffed teddy bear. Her eyes were wide with terror, but there was also a flicker of peace in them, a strange, almost serene acceptance. And I understood. She had faith. Not the loud, boisterous kind of faith, but a quiet, deep-rooted belief that transcended the fear, that anchored her soul even in the face of imminent death. And her face, even in that moment of terror, shone with a faint but undeniable light. Then I saw a man in his late 40s, dressed in a business suit. He was shouting, cursing, railing against God, fate, anything he could think of. His face was contorted with rage and fear, his eyes filled with a darkness that mirrored the malevolent force I had seen earlier. He had lived a life of ambition, of greed, of ruthless self-interest. He had everything money could buy, but his soul was empty. And in that final moment, he was utterly alone, facing an abyss of despair. The contrast between these two, the young woman with her quiet faith and the businessman with his empty rage, was stark. It was a living illustration of the chasm, the dividing line between those who had chosen the light, even in small, seemingly insignificant ways, and those who had embraced the darkness. The vision shifted again, and now I was inside the plane, feeling the impact, the shattering of metal, the tearing of flesh. It wasn't physical pain I felt, but a soul-wrenching agony, a collective cry of despair that echoed through the whatever realm I was in. And then silence. But it wasn't the peaceful silence of release. It was the hollow, empty silence of absence, of something lost, something irreplaceable. And the dark force, that malevolent presence, seemed to feed on that loss, to grow stronger, to rejoice in the devastation. Then I saw a place. It's hard to describe because it wasn't a place in any earthly sense. It was more like a state of being. It was divided, sharply, irrevocably. One side was light, not the blinding light I had experienced earlier, but a soft, gentle glow, a radiance that filled me with a sense of peace, of belonging, of ultimate fulfillment. I saw beings there not in physical bodies, but as forms of pure energy, shimmering, iridescent, connected to each other and to the source of the light. And I understood, without being told, that these were souls. Souls who had chosen the light, who had lived lives of love, of compassion, of faith. But the other side, oh, the other side. It was darkness. Not just the absence of light, but a palpable, oppressive darkness that seemed to suck the very life out of everything. It was a place of torment. Not physical torment, not in the way we usually think of it, but a spiritual anguish, a soul-deep despair that was far more terrifying than any physical pain. I saw shadows there, twisted, distorted forms that writhed in agony, consumed by relentless real fire that seared their flesh, a raging inferno of scorching flames, of excruciating heat, and unending torment, marking their eternal damnation and absolute, irreversible separation from the light. And I understood, with a horror that chilled me to my core, that these were also souls. Souls who had chosen the darkness, who had lived lives of selfishness, of hatred, of rejection of the light. It wasn't a punishment inflicted upon them. It was the consequence of their choices. They had separated themselves from the source of life, from the source of love, and this burning torment, this eternal literal fire, was the inevitable result. It was the natural state of a soul that had turned away from its creator. And the most terrifying part was that it was eternal. There was no escape, no second chance, no hope of redemption. It was a final, irreversible separation. And the screams, the sounds that emanated from that place were not screams of pain, but screams of utter, unmitigated despair. The sound of a soul realizing too late the magnitude of its mistake. Then I saw among them some notable figures. I saw people that lived good lives, but chose false beliefs. They all had the same screams, screams of despair for not finding the truth when on earth. The vision shifted again, and now I was shown the nature of that malevolent force. It wasn't a single entity, but a collective, a legion of fallen beings. Beings who had once been bathed in the light, but had chosen rebellion, had turned away from their creator and embraced darkness. They still had power, a distorted, corrupted power, but power nonetheless. And their sole purpose was to deceive, to mislead, to draw souls away from the light and into the darkness. They were the puppet masters, the whisperers of doubt, the architects of chaos. And I saw how they operated, not through brute force, but through subtlety, through lies, through illusions, through temptations. They appealed to our pride, our greed, our lust, our fear. They twisted truth, obscured reality, created confusion. They used our own weaknesses, our own desires against us. And the DC crash, it was just one small piece of their larger plan. A plan to sow discord, to create suffering, to separate humanity from the source of life and light. They were behind every war, every act of violence, every injustice, every moment of despair. They were the architects of our collective misery. But they weren't all powerful. They could influence, they could tempt, they could deceive, but they couldn't force. The ultimate choice, the decision of which path to follow, still rested with us. We had free will. We had the power to choose light over darkness, love over hate, truth over lies. And that, I realized, was the most terrifying truth of all. We weren't just victims of these dark forces. We were participants in our own fate. Our choices, our actions, our beliefs, they all mattered. They determined which side of that chasm we would ultimately find ourselves on. Then I realized something that sent shivers. I realized the dark forces were so subtle, that they even created and manipulated religions and beliefs, so people would be deceived by these false beliefs, thinking they are doing the right thing and end trapped in hell. The vision showed me this: people trapped in hell by following their false beliefs. The vision started to fade, the images becoming less distinct, the sounds less intense. But the knowledge, the understanding, remained. It was etched into my soul, burned into my consciousness. I had been shown everything. The reality of the spiritual realm, the battle between light and darkness, the consequences of our choices, the ultimate destiny of our souls. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to change. I had to live differently. I had to choose the light, not just in the big dramatic moments, but in every small, seemingly insignificant decision. I had to love, to forgive, to serve, to strive for holiness. Not for the sake of reward, not to earn my way into the light, but because it was the only way to be. The only way to align myself with the source of all life, all goodness, all truth. The fading continued, but before everything went completely back to wherever I was before, I received one final crucial piece of understanding. It wasn't a vision, not exactly, but more like a direct download of knowledge into my consciousness. It clarified the paths. It showed how deeply the deception ran. I saw, with crystal clarity, that many of the paths that claimed to lead to the light didn't. They were clever imitations, carefully crafted counterfeits designed by that malevolent force to trap and ensnare souls. I saw false religions, built on lies and half-truths, promising salvation but delivering only emptiness. I saw twisted ideologies, masquerading as wisdom, leading people away from true spiritual understanding. I saw cults of personality, elevating flawed individuals to godlike status, blinding their followers to the real source of light. I saw with horror that most of what the world considered spiritual or enlightened was, in fact, a carefully constructed deception, a labyrinth of false paths designed to keep souls trapped in darkness. It was a vast, intricate network of lies, woven so skillfully that even the most sincere seekers often fell prey. And then I saw the true path. It wasn't flashy or popular or easy. It wasn't about grand pronouncements or elaborate rituals or self-proclaimed gurus. It was about humility, about acknowledging our own brokenness, our own need for redemption. It was about repentance, about turning away from the darkness and embracing the light. It was about faith, not blind faith, but a faith rooted in truth. A faith that recognized the reality of the spiritual realm, the battle being waged for our souls. It was about love, not a sentimental, superficial love, but a deep, abiding, sacrificial love that mirrored the love emanating from that light being I had seen earlier. It was about obedience, not a blind, unquestioning obedience, but a willing submission to the will of the Creator, a recognition that His ways were higher than our ways, His knowledge greater than our knowledge, His love deeper than our love. And this path, this narrow, difficult path, was the only path that led to the light. All other paths, no matter how appealing, how seemingly virtuous, how widely accepted, ultimately led to that darkness, that torment, that eternal separation. This sent chills down my spine. My chances of finding the truth when I was living were seemingly so low because of the many options available. Then the last flicker of understanding came. It was about the nature of God. Not a distant, impersonal deity, but a loving, compassionate Creator who yearned for relationship with His creation. A God who had provided a way, a means for us to overcome our brokenness and return to the light. And this way, this means, was through sacrifice. Not our own sacrifice, for we were incapable of atoning for our own sins, but the sacrifice of something infinitely precious, something pure, something untainted, something that could bridge the chasm between our fallen nature and His perfect holiness. It was a glimpse of the divine plan, a plan of redemption, of reconciliation, of restoration, a plan that had been in place since the beginning, a plan that was both terrifyingly just and unbelievably merciful. Then I saw images, not just random but organized. These were about how the dark forces are manipulating and how people are straying away from the true path. I saw preachers teaching false doctrines, preachers preaching only nice words, preachers twisting God's words, preachers making money from God's words. I saw politicians, the obvious corrupt ones and the ones who act good, that even sincere Christians will be deceived. I saw people celebrating false holidays and traditions. I saw them living their lives according to the false practices, feeling happy that they are following the right thing. That image was the most painful to watch. I saw people doing good deeds, but for the wrong reasons. I saw people having faith, but in the wrong things. I saw people praying, but to idols and false gods. I saw the deception. And now I have to warn people, this is my mission now. And with that final devastating revelation, everything truly went black. Not the empty blackness of before, but a solid, impenetrable blackness, like being buried alive. I felt a pressure, a squeezing sensation, as if I were being compressed, forced back into something. My senses, or whatever remained of them, were overwhelmed. The images, the knowledge, the terrifying truths I had witnessed, they were all still there, imprinted on my consciousness, but they were fading, receding like a dream upon waking. I struggled instinctively to hold on to them, to grasp the reality of what I had seen, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. It slipped through my fingers, leaving only a lingering dampness, a faint echo of something profound and terrifying. Then I felt a jolt, a sharp, searing pain that ripped through well, I didn't know what it ripped through because I didn't feel like I had a body anymore. But it was pain, real, intense, and it was welcome. Because pain meant feeling, and feeling meant being alive. I gasped, or at least I thought I gasped. It was more like a sucking in of something. Not air, not exactly, but something vital, something essential. And with that gasp, I felt myself returning to my body, to the workshop, to the cold concrete floor and the spreading pool of my own blood. The transition wasn't instantaneous. It was gradual, like slowly surfacing from a deep, dark well. I felt a tingling sensation, a pins and needles feeling that spread through my limbs. I felt the weight of my body, the pressure of the floor against my cheek, the throbbing ache in my head. And then I heard it. The sound of voices. Distant, muffled at first, but growing clearer. "Rick, Rick, can you hear me?" It was Travis, the farmer. His voice was filled with concern, with a tremor of fear. "Oh my God, there's so much blood." That was Bonnie, Travis's wife, her voice high-pitched with panic. I tried to speak, to tell them I was okay, but all that came out was a groan. A weak, pathetic sound that barely registered above the ringing in my ears. I felt hands on me, gently turning me over. I blinked, my eyes struggling to focus in the dim light. I saw Travis's face, etched with worry, and Bonnie, hovering behind him, her eyes wide with alarm. "Rick, stay with us," Travis said, his voice firm but gentle. "Help is on the way." I managed a weak nod, my head feeling like a bowling ball filled with lead. The pain was excruciating, almost unbearable, but it was real. It was a tangible, physical pain, and it was 1,000 times better than the soul-deep agony I had witnessed in that other place. I looked again and tried to recognize them. It was hard to see through the blood on my head. Then I blinked again to focus my vision, and I saw. It was just for a fraction of a second. But I saw, on top of their heads, a small light hovering. It was not something you see physically, but rather I saw with my soul. Something new I got from the other side. The light on Bonnie's head was brighter. I tried to speak again, to tell them what I had seen, what I had learned, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was tight, my tongue felt like a thick, clumsy piece of leather. And besides, how could I possibly explain it? How could I put into words the vastness, the complexity, the terrifying beauty of what I had experienced? They wouldn't understand. They'd think I was crazy, delirious from the head injury, and maybe I was. Maybe it was all just a hallucination, a bizarre byproduct of trauma and blood loss. But I knew it wasn't. I knew with a certainty that went beyond logic, beyond reason, that what I had seen was real. More real than anything I had ever experienced in my earthly life. It was a truth that had been seared into my soul, a truth that I could never unsee, never forget. The paramedics arrived, their sirens screaming through the quiet morning air. They bustled around me, efficient and professional, checking my vital signs, bandaging my head, strapping me to a stretcher. I remember the ride to the hospital, the bumpy, jarring motion of the ambulance, the flashing lights, the constant chatter of the paramedics. I remember the cold, sterile environment of the emergency room, the bright lights, the probing questions of the doctors and nurses. I remember the endless tests, the X-rays, the CT scans, the MRI. I remember the waiting, the uncertainty, the fear that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. But through it all, the visions remained. The faces, the light, the darkness, the crash, the truth. It was all there, vivid and clear, a constant reminder of the other reality that existed beyond the veil of our physical world. The doctors were baffled. They couldn't explain how I had survived. The piece of screwdriver that had broken off and hit me had penetrated my skull, causing significant damage to my brain. They said I should have been dead, or at the very least, severely brain damaged. But I wasn't. Oh, I had a long road to recovery ahead of me. There would be surgery, physical therapy, months of rehabilitation. But my mind was intact, clearer in fact than it had ever been. They called it a miracle, a medical anomaly, a statistical impossibility. They shook their heads, muttered about the mysteries of the human brain, and discharged me from the hospital with a long list of instructions and a prescription for painkillers. But I knew the truth. It wasn't a miracle, not in the way they meant it. It was something else, something far more profound, far more significant. It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a glimpse into the reality that awaits us all. My recovery was slow, painful, and frustrating. The physical wounds healed eventually, but the other wounds, the wounds to my soul, those were a different story. The visions, the knowledge I had gained during my NDE, didn't fade. They remained with me, a constant presence, a persistent echo of eternity. I couldn't shake the images of the faces, the light, the darkness. I couldn't forget the feeling of unworthiness, the weight of my sins, the terrifying reality of eternal consequences. And the DC crash, that vision haunted me. I saw it every time I closed my eyes, heard the screams, felt the impact, witnessed the malevolent force at work. I tried to talk to Cynthia about it, but the words, they just wouldn't come out right. I sounded like a crazy person, rambling about light and darkness, puppet masters, and soul-deep despair. She was supportive, of course, she always had been. She listened patiently, held my hand, told me it was just the trauma, the medication, the after effects of the injury. But I knew it was more than that, and her inability to understand, to grasp the reality of what I had experienced, created a distance between us, a chasm that I didn't know how to bridge. I stopped going to church, not the small, non-denominational place Cynthia and I used to attend, but I meant I stopped going to any kind of church, not because I'd lost my faith, but because I'd seen the truth. And the truth was that most of what passed for church these days was wrong. It was a watered-down, diluted version of the real thing, a carefully crafted deception designed to keep people comfortable, complacent, and ultimately lost. The sermons were all about self-help and positive thinking, about prosperity and success, about being a good person. But they never mentioned the darkness. They never talked about sin, about repentance, about the need for redemption. They never warned people about the chasm, the dividing line between those who had chosen the light and those who had embraced the darkness. They never mentioned the terrifying reality of eternal consequences. They were feel-good messages, and I knew those preachers would end up on the other side if they didn't change their ways. It was all surface, shallow, meaningless, and ultimately dangerous. It was like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, pretending it was healed when the infection was still festering beneath the surface. I know now that these types of preaching are encouraged by the dark forces. This is how subtle they are. I tried reading the Bible, searching for answers, for confirmation of what I had seen, but even there I found confusion. So many different interpretations, so many conflicting doctrines, so many denominations and sects, each claiming to have the truth. It was overwhelming, frustrating, and ultimately disheartening. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, with no anchor, no compass, no clear path to follow. And then I started to see things. Not visions, not like before, but glimpses. Flashes of something else, superimposed on the everyday world. I'd be walking down the street and I'd see, for a fleeting moment, a flicker of light around someone's head. A faint, almost imperceptible glow that indicated their spiritual state. Or I'd see the opposite. A shadow, a darkness that clung to them like a shroud, a sign of their separation from the light. I began to understand the people around me on a level I had never experienced before. It wasn't something I could control or even predict. It just happened, unexpected, unbidden, and always disturbing. It was like seeing the world through a different lens, a lens that revealed the hidden reality beneath the surface. And what I saw, terrified me. Most people, I realized, were walking around in darkness, not a literal darkness, but a spiritual darkness, a blindness to the truth, a separation from the source of life and light. They were consumed by their own desires, their own ambitions, their own petty concerns, oblivious to the battle being waged for their souls. They were like sheep heading for the slaughter, unaware of the danger that awaited them. I tried to warn them. I felt I had to, but my attempts were clumsy, awkward, and mostly unsuccessful. I'd try to talk to people about what I'd seen, about the importance of choosing the light, about the reality of eternal consequences. But they'd look at me like I was crazy. They'd smile politely, nod their heads, and change the subject. Or they'd get defensive, angry, even hostile. "You're judging me," they'd say. "You're being self-righteous. You're trying to force your beliefs on me." And maybe they were right. Maybe I was being judgmental, self-righteous, and forceful. I didn't know how to communicate this truth, this urgent warning, without sounding like a fanatic. I realized that words weren't enough. People were too blinded by their own beliefs, their own desires, their own darkness to hear what I was saying. They needed to see it for themselves. But how could I show them? How could I make them understand the reality of the spiritual realm, the battle between light and darkness, the eternal consequences of their choices? I felt helpless, like a lone voice crying in the wilderness, a prophet without an audience, a messenger with a message that no one wanted to hear. And the loneliness, that was the hardest part. The feeling of being utterly alone in this knowledge, this understanding, the inability to share it with anyone, to connect with anyone on this deeper level. Cynthia tried, bless her heart, she really did. But she couldn't understand. She'd listen patiently, offer words of comfort, but I could see the doubt in her eyes, the unspoken question, has my husband lost his mind? I started spending more and more time alone, lost in my own thoughts, wrestling with the burden of what I had seen. I'd go for long walks in the woods, searching for something, a sign, a confirmation, a connection to that other reality. I'd sit by the river for hours, watching the water flow, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves, trying to find some peace, some solace in the natural world. But even there, I couldn't escape the awareness, the knowledge that even the beauty of nature was tainted, corrupted by the darkness that had infected the world. The constant subtle reminders that the dark forces are always working. I started having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams that replayed the visions I had seen during my NDE. The faces, the light, the darkness, the crash, the torment. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, my body trembling, the screams still echoing in my ears. The nightmares were so real, so intense that they felt more like memories than dreams. And they were always followed by a feeling of dread, a profound, overwhelming sense of impending doom. The knowledge that something bad was coming, something that would shake the world to its core. This feeling was similar to the one I had earlier in the day when the screwdriver snapped. I also felt the same when I saw the DC crash vision. I didn't know what it was or when it would happen, but I knew it was inevitable. And I knew that most people were utterly unprepared. I became obsessed with the news, searching for any sign, any indication of the coming darkness. I scoured the internet, read countless articles, watched endless videos, looking for something that would confirm my fears, that would validate what I had seen. I found plenty of evidence of darkness. Wars, famines, plagues, natural disasters, political corruption, social unrest, moral decay. It was all there, unfolding before my eyes, just as I had seen in my visions. But most people, I realized, were numb to it. They'd become so accustomed to the darkness, so desensitized to the suffering, that they no longer even noticed it. Or if they did notice it, they dismissed it as normal, as just the way things were. It became clear to me that they are being numbed by the dark forces. They were living in a bubble, a carefully constructed illusion of safety and security, while the world around them was crumbling. And they were sleepwalking towards disaster. I tried to warn them again and again, but my words fell on deaf ears. I was just a crazy old mechanic, a nobody, a voice crying in the wilderness. And then one day, I stumbled upon something that changed everything. It was an old, leather-bound book, hidden away in the back of a dusty antique shop. I was drawn to it, instinctively, as if some unseen force had guided me there. The book was written in a language I didn't recognize, an ancient script that seemed to resonate with something deep within me. I couldn't read the words, but I could feel them. I could sense the power, the wisdom, the truth that emanated from its pages. I bought the book, even though I didn't know what it was or what it said. I took it home and spent hours just holding it, feeling its weight, tracing the strange symbols with my fingers, and then slowly, painstakingly, I began to understand. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a gradual unfolding, a slow dawning of knowledge. The book, I realized, was a guide, a map of the spiritual realm, a description of the true path, a warning about the dangers that awaited those who strayed. It was the confirmation I had been searching for, the validation of what I had seen, and it was terrifying. Because the book didn't just confirm my visions, expanded on them. It revealed a depth of darkness, a level of deception that I hadn't even imagined. It spoke of ancient entities, beings of immense power and malevolence, who had been working behind the scenes for millennia, manipulating human events, sowing discord, and leading souls astray. And it named the true path, the only path that led to salvation, to redemption, to light. It was a path that had been obscured, distorted, and almost completely forgotten by the modern world. The book was clear, crystal clear. The right path is so narrow and hard that only a few people on earth have found it, and the only ones who did are the ones who devoted their whole life in search of it, and were also helped to find it. It was a path of sacrifice, of self-denial, of unwavering devotion to the one true God. It was a path that demanded everything, that offered no compromises, that tolerated no deviations. It was the path of faith. Not a blind, unthinking faith, but a faith rooted in truth. A faith that acknowledged the reality of the spiritual realm, the battle between light and darkness, and the eternal consequences of our choices. It was a faith that recognized the divine plan, the plan of redemption, of reconciliation, of restoration that had been in place since the beginning. And the book made it clear that this path, this ancient way, was the only way to escape the coming darkness, the only way to find true peace, true fulfillment, true life. As I delved deeper into the book, I began to understand the language. It wasn't a language of words, but a language of symbols, of archetypes, of spiritual truths that transcended human understanding. It was a language that spoke directly to my soul, a language that bypassed my intellect and resonated with something deep within me, something that had been awakened by my NDE. And as I learned to read this language, I began to see the world in a whole new light. I saw the patterns, the connections, the hidden meanings behind everyday events. I saw how the ancient entities were working, how they were manipulating the media, the government, the education system, even the churches, to spread their lies and lead people astray. It became like a second nature to me to detect the agenda of evil. I started to feel when an act of evil was about to happen. I saw how they were using technology, entertainment, and even religion to distract people from the truth, to keep them blinded by their own desires, their own ambitions, their own darkness. And I saw how few people were aware, how few were even looking for the true path, how most were content to follow the wide, easy road that led to destruction. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. I felt like I was carrying the burden of the world on my shoulders, the responsibility for warning everyone, for saving them from the coming darkness. But I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I needed to find others who understood, who had seen the truth, who were willing to fight. I started searching, desperately, for anyone who might share my understanding. I looked online, in libraries, in obscure corners of the world, for any sign, any indication of others who were awake. I found a few. A small, scattered group of individuals who had also had glimpses, who had seen the darkness, who had recognized the true path, who were struggling, just like me, to make sense of it all. They weren't organized, they weren't connected, they were just isolated voices crying in the wilderness. But they were something, a flicker of hope in the gathering gloom. And together, slowly, tentatively, we began to connect, to share our experiences, our insights, our fears, to support each other, to encourage each other, to prepare for what was coming. We knew we couldn't stop it. The darkness was too powerful, the deception too widespread, the momentum too great. But we could warn people. We could shine a light, however faint, in the gathering gloom. We could offer a choice, a chance to turn away from the darkness and embrace the light, a chance to escape the coming destruction. We knew most wouldn't listen, most would dismiss us as crazy, as fanatics, as lost souls. But we had to try. We had to fulfill our mission, the mission that had been given to me that day in the workshop when the screwdriver snapped and the sky cracked open, the mission to share my NDE. Life after the NDE, it wasn't easy. Cynthia divorced me. She couldn't handle the new Rick. The Rick who saw shadows where others saw sunlight, who spoke of ancient entities and impending doom. I don't blame her. It was a lot to take in. I tried, God knows I tried, to explain, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us, but it was no use. My NDE made me lose earthly connections. The small airstrip at Silverton? I left. Couldn't stand the smell of jet fuel anymore. It brought back flashes. The tilted horizon, the crimson mirror, the suffocating silence. The tools made me remember how I broke that screwdriver and how it all happened. I moved to a small cabin nestled in the foothills of the Rockies. Solitude suited me, gave me time to think, to pray, to wrestle with the burden I carried. I live a simple life now. Grow my own food, chop my own wood, draw water from a well. It's a far cry from the hustle and bustle of the airstrip, but it's peaceful. In a way, the seeing hasn't stopped. The flickers of light, the clinging shadows, I see them everywhere. On the faces of strangers in the grocery store, on the newscasters delivering their carefully crafted narratives, on the preachers preaching their watered-down gospels. It became really hard for me to see the world like I used to see it. I've learned to filter it to a degree, to focus on the present moment, on the task at hand, to avoid the constant bombardment of spiritual information. But it's always there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness, a constant reminder of the unseen reality, the battle raging around us, the stakes involved. The small group I connected with were still in touch. We call ourselves remnants. We share information, offer support, and pray. A lot of praying. We're not trying to build an organization or start a movement. We're just holding on to the truth, holding on to the light, holding on to each other. We know the darkness is coming. We see the signs all around us, the increasing chaos, the growing polarization, the moral decay. It's all unfolding just as the ancient book and my visions predicted. We're preparing as best we can, not with bunkers and stockpiles of weapons, but with prayer, with faith, with love. The only weapons. We know we can't stop what's coming, but we can endure, we can witness, we can offer a choice. And that, I believe, is our purpose. To be a light, however small, in the gathering darkness. To be a voice, however faint, crying out in the wilderness. To be a remnant. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is still hope, there is still truth, there is still light. My days are spent mostly in contemplation. I read the ancient book, I pray, I listen, for the still small voice that speaks to my soul. I've learned a lot since that day in the workshop, about the nature of reality, about the battle between good and evil, about the ultimate destiny of humanity. I've learned that truth is a narrow path, a difficult climb. But if you devote your whole life to finding it, you will. I've learned that love is the most powerful force in the universe. I've learned that most Christians are not following the right path. And I've learned that even a broken-down old aircraft mechanic can be a vessel of light, a vessel of hope, a vessel of truth. The DC crash, it still haunts me. But I understand it now. It was a sacrifice, a tragic, unnecessary, but ultimately meaningful sacrifice. It was a wake-up call. A warning, a glimpse of what's coming, and I was chosen to see it, to understand it, to share it, not because I'm special or worthy or deserving, but because someone had to. Someone had to break through the illusion, to see the truth, to sound the alarm. And that, I believe, is my prayer, that my brokenness, my pain, my experience might be used for good, that it might help even one soul to turn away from the darkness and embrace the light, that it might make a difference, even a small one, in the face of eternity. I spend my days searching and researching, taking clues from here and there. I try to find out more of the truth, how Christ was crucified, how he resurrected, about the early believers and how they chose the right path and what they know. Every clue reveals more and more truth. This is my life now. No more Cynthia Pye,